Hey guys, this is my progression on the Freeze Monk in Path of Exile 2. This video covers progression from Act 3 as well as Cruel Act 1, which is more or less Act 4. If you are interested in starting off in Act 1 as well as progressing in Act 2, I also have videos covering that, and I will include the links for those in the video description. I'll start off here by just showing some general mapping with this build, and then I'll go on to bossing with this build as well, and it's really good against bosses as well. And then I'll cover the passives, the gear, and the skills. There will also be timestamps in the video description that you can use to skip ahead to the section that you're interested in. Before going through the build, here's a couple of boss highlights just to showcase how effective the build is against bosses. This is the first boss in Cruel Act 2. This is the Executioner boss in Cruel Act 1. And this is the Count, which is the final boss in Act 1 in Cruel difficulty. We keep him stunned most of the time, so he doesn't even get to do anything much. In fact, he dies before doing his wolf arena thing attack. I don't know what skill you call that. The one where he jumps off from the mist. Here I thought he was about to transition into phase 2, so I rolled off. I wasted like 5-6 seconds here. Not sure why he didn't transition, but here he finally transitioned into phase 2. Watch how often the boss gets frozen. What I want to start off here first is with the passive tree, because I did make some pretty drastic changes overall to the tree. So if you want, just a quick disclaimer before I start, if you want, I will also include a link in the video description to Act 1 and Act 2 just to see how the build starts off right at the start of the game and how I progress through to this point. So if you haven't checked that out, do check that out. And I made this massive change in my build when I hit around level 48 or so, maybe plus minus 1 level, and that's somewhere late in Act 3. So I would highly recommend to wait until you are somewhere around there, because you do need enough skill points to get to this particular node here before you make the change. So what you want to do is hit the resonance node, and I spent about 20 to 30k gold to Respec. So just a quick explanation of what I did. First off, I used to have these nodes here, so the moment of truth for crit bonuses, and then I took these crit nodes over here as well to reach to this bunch of nodes. I Respec out of all of that because I needed the points. I do plan to get back into these nodes in the future, but as of now, it's probably better to hit all these far off nodes right at the start, because you get a lot of juicy bonuses from the nodes at the end. So it's worthwhile, in my opinion, to let go of some of the earlier nodes. So only do this Respec if you have enough nodes once more to hit the nodes at the quarterstaff bonus here, the herald bonus here, the resonance bonus I mentioned, as well as these two juicy cold notes right at the end here. If you have enough, to hit this, then you can make the change. If you do not, then I would recommend not to. And you can just check it out at the hooded man. You know, you can respec and you can see whether you reach enough, and if you can't, you can just cancel out the respec without losing gold. So what I did is you come down here and you move all the way to the right. Forget these nodes at the bottom, you don't need this yet. These are what I went into after I've gotten all the other nodes. So for now, you can let go of all these nodes and I'll come back to here later on. Move on to the right, pick up these quarterstaff nodes. Especially now, you also want to get one with the storm because I will be using power charge. Pick up the coming calamity, then you branch upwards to firstly the resonance, and then only these two ice nodes, thin ice and heavy frost. Whatever nodes you have left, pick up. I normally pick up mental toughness just to help out a bit on mana regen. It helps out a lot for only 2 points, so I think it's worthwhile. And then whatever else you have left, first you spec into Falcon Technique. This drastically boosts your attack speed, and then you move on to the right to Bestial Skin. If you don't have this, it's okay. These are sort of icing on the cake. If you have the rest, you can make the respec. Now why did I respec? Well, mainly to pick up the resonance node here. Because what I am using is charge staff, and charge staff requires power charges, and normally power charges are extremely difficult to get. So what I did firstly is pick up Combat Frenzy. So Combat Frenzy gives you frenzy charges, and frenzy charges you get anytime you freeze an enemy, which is essentially all the time, so you'll be swimming in frenzy charges. And because I've spec'd into resonance node, frenzy charges actually gives me power charges instead. So now I get unlimited power charges, which means that I can have near 100% uptime on charge staff. Now the reason why I picked up charge staff is so that I get one additional way of attack, so to speak. Now the lightning damage isn't as high as a cold damage because most of the nodes that you pick up focuses more on cold damage, but you have now an additional attack each time you hit ice strike. So each ice strike also lets off the shockwave, and because now I have one additional attack, I can now slot in extra sockets such as ice bite, persistence just to let the buff last longer. Conduction is also something I'm sort of testing out now, because additional shock actually brings a lot to the table. So shock increases damage taken by the enemies by 20%, and on top of this, it is one additional element, which means that when you drop Tempest Bell gets additional 30% damage per elemental ailment. So if you have chill, freeze and shock on it, it is a huge damage increase. On top of the usual shock provides 20% damage increase to enemies anyway, so it is pretty worthwhile to get shocked on the table. You don't need a lot of passives to get this going, so in that way I think charge staff is worthwhile. Once you unlock an additional support slot, there's other support skills you can also slot this in, so you now have additional ways to land your freeze and all the things. And of course, charge staff actually looks pretty cool. It looks like you're wielding a lightsaber, so you always have that. Now the question then is that how do you have enough spirit to have Herald of Ice and Combat Frenzy, because each of them takes 30 spirit. So what I did is also respec out of my second ascendancy. So in the past I used to go to and I shall rage here to get Unbound Avatar. I played with this throughout most of Act 3 and it is somewhat helpful, but the use is extremely limited. The bad thing about Unbound Avatar is each time you transition into a new zone, you lose all the charges and you have to recharge all over again. And even with persistence buff, when you have it, it doesn't actually last very long. So I feel, for 2 ascendancy nodes, it's not worth the uptime. Instead, what I do is go to this node here, which grants you additional spirit per evasion on your body armor or energy shield. So this gives me an additional 30 spirit because I do have a pretty good body armor with a lot of evasion. So I got this at the end of Act 2 sort of, and I've been using this all to now. You can probably get an armor with like 800 evasion once you hit cruel difficulty, but just this much is enough to give you 30 extra spirit, and therefore allow me to also equip Combat Frenzy. And by sort of end of Act 3, you can also get another 30 spirit through the quest, and I use that to get Ghost Dance. Now if you don't have a good body armor that gives you 30 spirit, that's okay, just do without Ghost Dance. So do your first 30 spirit goes to Herald of Ice, and then the next quest that gives you 30 spirit, you give it to Combat Frenzy, and you should be able to get the build going. Once you unlock the extra Ascendancy node and get another additional 30 spirit, I highly recommend that Ghost Dance because it is an additional layer of defense. So this is the main changes that I made through the skill. I'm still using Ice Spec, and Temper Spell absolutely shreds. And Herald of Ice is, I mean, some nice damage, but it's also there to add some additional ailments as well. So I have Frost Nexus to chill the ground, I have Blind, and I used to have Mime at the end here, but I decided to go for Glaciation. I might actually slot Mime back in. The main reason why I put Glaciation is at the Respec that I did, I removed a lot of freeze build up. So I think putting in Glaciation helps to freeze a bit more enemies. But once you get a little bit more nodes of freeze build up again, then you can move these up for something like Mime or something similar. So a little bit about the equipment update, and there really isn't much. The main thing I focused on is weapons, and I tried to craft a weapon anytime I get a new act. Again, you can refer to the video description for links on Act 1 and Act 2 and what weapons I used back then. But this is the weapon I crafted for the start of Act 3. And for the armor pieces, I just relied on whatever I could find, and I sort of prioritized evasion. A little bit more about that later, but first on the weapon. So the weapon that you want to try to focus on cold damage and especially the plus levels to melee skills if you have it. Everything else is just gravy on top. Try to focus on these two, and what I did is just look at the vendor, and every time level up, or if I see any stuff on the ground, I try to upgrade it to magic quality to see what passives I get. If you get plus levels to melee skills and you get some sort of damage modifier like physical damage or cold damage, that's good enough. Then you can just change it to rare by the Regal Orb and upgrade it accordingly. Or you can of course just trade for one decent weapon in Path of Exile sites. Just for one Exalted Orb, you should be able to get something pretty decent. Again, you don't need to get a lot going. This build is pretty strong even with just an average sort of weapon. And I use this all the way until Act 4 or Cruel Act 1. And in Cruel Act 1, that's when I changed my weapon to this one that you see right here. But this weapon is really enough to finish the entire normal difficulty. The final boss took me like maybe 2 minutes, and it's only that long because I had to spend a good like 20-30 seconds to evade some of the mechanics while the boss is flying in the air. Now coming on to armor pieces. Now armor pieces for the entirety of Act 3, you don't really have to worry too much. In fact, I did have 0 changes on my gear as far as I can remember. But the one thing you want to start looking out for coming into Act 4 is evasion pieces, especially for the body armor. If you don't have one, then I would also highly recommend to just trade for one in the Path of Exile site. Again, one Exalted Orb is enough. Just prioritize getting evasion, and if possible some sort of resistance on top of your body armor, because getting one combined with the Ascendancy node gives you additional 30 spirit, which you can then use to equip the Ghost Wolf passive, and that helps tremendously in survivability. So start looking out for evasion pieces. The rest of my gear absolutely is terrible, so there's no evasion on the helmet, there's no evasion on the boots, there's very little evasion on the gloves. So you can see I'm very poorly defensively stacked. And there are of course some range attacks that can really make your life miserable because of this, but beyond that, this build is pretty good because you'll be able to freeze most enemies, even some ranged enemies, without much difficulty, and they die pretty quickly anyway. Lastly, to close out the video, just a little bit of description on how general gameplay goes. One of the big changes from my last video is I've taken off Wave of Frost. You don't really need it. You can still use it if you want to, because there is the button slots available for it. I'm only using 4 skills here actually. So if you still like to use Wave of Frost, you definitely can slot it in, but you can see you don't really need it now that you have fast attack speed. For general gameplay, it's very easy. All you do is going around ice striking enemies. Once they freeze, you get power charges, so you can have your charge stuff up just by pressing a button. For bosses such as this, where they don't go down in 1 or 2 hits, just drop a temper spell and they go down pretty quickly. So for general mapping, I'm only using 3 buttons, which is the ice stuff, that's my basic attack, ice strike, sorry. And then I'm using charge staff anytime I need to refresh charge staff, and the third button is temper spell. Well, what about the 4th button? The 4th button is actually Hand of Chayula. I use the Hand of Chayula to land the mark of freeze, or frost mark, whatever you want to call it, the one that makes the enemies more likely to freeze, as well as hypothermia, so 2-in-1 debuff. So I always start off the engagement with the Hand of Chayula to land the debuffs, and then the rest is pretty much the same. In bosses though, what I do is I just have the temple bell on my top left bumper, my ice strike is on the top right bumper. I'm using controller to play, so I'm just spamming ice strike while I keep spamming temper spell on the top left bumper, so that you drop the temper spell as soon as you have it charged. This is the final boss in Act 3. And it's also very simple, so same strategy, you start off the engagement with the Hand of Chayula, and you just have to refresh the debuffs every time that it's out, and then you just spam ice strikes as much as possible. During this boss fight, I still haven't unlocked the attack speed passives yet, so you can see my attack speed is noticeably slower than the previous boss fight. But even without, you can comfortably take on bosses, and with the attack speed, they get frozen much more often than not. So as I'm fighting the boss again here, wave 2, the debuff is out, so start off with Hand of Chayula, and then spam ice strike, and then keep hitting the temple bell so that you drop it as soon as you can.
Existence is merely energy. I plan for every contingency. Fatal ambition.
Here I have no idea how do you actually dodge the attack. I almost died here, but I'm sure there's a way to dodge the floating boss dropping on you kind of thing. Anyway, other than that, it's pretty straightforward. I just stay in front of the boss and smash him to death. Thanks for watching.